Okay.
Okay. Can you tell me your name and a little bit about yourself?
I'm Sherry Brown. I've lived in Somerset for, in a few weeks it'll be 32 years, and I know that because we moved here for my husband's job when my son was a newborn from Louisville. So I'm not a native of here, but I've lived here longer than I lived where I was born. So
Where
I was born in Breckinridge County, Kentucky, which is between Louisville and Owensboro, about halfway between, in a small town, but a completely different part of the state. So I wasn't familiar with Somerset when we moved here, but it's my children's home, and it's become mine. So I consider myself sort of a native now.
Are you very interested in politics? Are you a regular voter? Have you always...
Oh, I'm definitely a regular voter, but in all honesty, I was not terribly interested in politics until the election in 2008. And I can't really tell you it was even issues that drew me in at that point. It was that I became captivated by the candidate.
Okay.
And I'd say since that time, for about 10 years, I've paid fairly close attention, certainly more so than ever in the past.
Are you Democrat, Republican, Independent? How do you characterize?
I'm a lifelong registered Democrat. Came from a part of the state that was reliably Democratic for years, and but not a, what do you call it, a yellow dog Democrat. I mean, I've voted all over the place. Truly, in my early young adulthood, right out of college, I worked in a brokerage firm in Louisville, and of course, all I was around was people with excess money to invest, and both my coworkers as well as the clients that we served were of that ilk. So I became very Republican in my thought processes and in my voting. I remember when Reagan came to Louisville, I believe it was 1984. And my office was right across from the Hyatt Regency. He was staying there, and there was such an excitement that he was going to speak downtown. And in the office, they were passing out these buttons that said, "I'm one of Reagan's rich friends," which, of course, I was 22 years old. I wasn't a rich friend, but I put the button on, and I proudly went down and cheered him on at the speech. And I felt very much that was, in as much as a 22-year-old can know about how they feel about things, I felt that was where I fit. But I find that as I've gotten older, I go back to the political values of my roots. My parents, my father grew up in a family of 9 children on a farm during the Depression. Franklin Roosevelt was his hero, and I find myself that I've kind of come full circle, and that I'm back kind of where I started.
Okay. Let's go back to the election for 2016. If you could tell me a little bit about what your thoughts were in that race, if you were leaning a particular way, or if you changed as you know other candidates dropped out, or how
No, again, I'm more so than I was, but I'm not a 100% a party person. But I was definitely a Hillary Clinton supporter. I thought Bernie Sanders was a little too far to the left to really win, even though some of his ideas I was okay with. But when it became obvious that Donald Trump would be the candidate, it certainly solidified my opinion, and until 9:38 p.m. on the night of the election, I didn't question the outcome. And it was, certainly a shock of my life and a low point in my life. And that's hard to say living where I live, because I'm very much in the minority. And I have friends who feel very differently, and I respect their opinions. I love them as people, but I just decided that I couldn't not be honest about the devastation that I felt. And the only way I knew to sort of express that was to go to Washington for the Women's March, you know, on the day after the inauguration, which I did with my daughter and my sister and my best friend from childhood and her daughter and granddaughter and sister. So there were like 8 of us from our childhood who have very close connections, who kind of, that felt good to me to be in the company of like-minded people to kind of just express our dismay. So I was and remain disappointed in the outcome of that, quite frankly.
What are some of the issues that are important to you? You were talking about the Women's March, so I would think that women's issues are important to you. What are some of the others that led to your maybe disappointment with Trump as the victor?
Well, probably primarily the how do I say it, the favoring of the well-to-do over the disenfranchised. I've led a very blessed and easy life, and I have no small amount of guilt about that sometimes, because there are a lot of people who, given their circumstances, I'm quite sure I wouldn't have survived, let alone thrived. And I admire that so much, and knowing that about myself and about a number of other people in this world, I suppose I have a sympathy for people who haven't been as fortunate and who have struggled. And I feel these policies are so skewed away from those in need that it troubles me greatly. And I know the arguments are that we are becoming a welfare state and we can't expect the government to take care of everything and everybody, and the government's gotten too big. I totally understand those concerns and respect them, but when we talk about, you know, for instance, in the most recent tax cut, and in the budget that was released yesterday, amping up the military at the expense of taking care of people in need, quite frankly, breaks my heart. I don't want to get bold and say it's an awful, terrible, immoral thing to do. I might think that, but I'm not going to say it. But it hurts me because, you know, the story was that Trump was going to drain the swamp, and trust me, the swamp has gotten deeper and wider and muckier in the past year. I mean, the people that have been given these cabinet jobs with their incredible, to me, lack of expertise in the subject matter, by virtue of their wealth and position or power, is so troublesome, so troublesome. I admire intelligence. I admire someone who is well-read, considers very carefully the issues at hand, and I think it's literally it's worse than business as usual. It's magnified tenfold by what we're seeing happening. I mean, the tax cuts are going to benefit corporations and the wealthy people. And as we know from the trickle-down economic policy from Reagan, who I voted for in the 80s, that doesn't work. That money doesn't get spent to create more jobs. And the $1,000 bonuses that people are getting are the small amounts that they're going to see incrementally in their checkbooks. Number one, are temporary. From what I understand, they're going to go away in 7 years, but the corporate tax cuts are not. And number two, it's just not realistic that small amount of returned income is going to make a difference in our overall economy. But tax breaks for uber wealthy people and corporations, that money's going to go concentrate more in the hands of the people who already hold the wealth, to the detriment of the general populace, I think. I have a soft place in my heart for immigrants. Talked to a cab driver in San Diego in the fall when my husband and I were there, and he was an engineer, and told a heartbreaking story of coming here with a job that he had been promised, and when he got here and had got his family here, somehow the company lost a contract or something, and he was out of a job, and he was facing deportation along with his family that he had just brought, and he was driving an Uber to put food on the table for his family, which is good honest work, but he was very scared, and he was a good person, and I feel like we have to be kinder toward our fellow man than the tone that's out there now. The tone that's there now is a divisive one. It's one of a me versus them. That's not what leadership should be doing. It should be uniting us in what makes our country great, and not dividing us further about it's either this side or it's this side. It's one, and I see that chasm growing more and more. So there are more specific issues. I'm not a huge environmentalist. I don't know a lot about the science, but it concerns me when we lose some of the regulations, because I believe we all know, unchecked, human nature is greedy and will do what it can get away with without being checked in some way. I'm concerned about health care for majority of people. I thought the Affordable Care Act, with all its flaws, was a move in the right direction. I have a personal experience with it. My brother would probably be dead without it. And he wasn't a bum that didn't work his whole life. He lost his job, unfortunately, a few months before he got terribly sick. And if it hadn't been for, quote, Obamacare, I don't know that he would have gotten the care that he had a complete heart failure here in Somerset, Kentucky, and had his life saved by the surgeon here, but he had a mid six-figure bill for it too, and it was taken care of. And all people who aren't insured are not deadbeats who've never worked and don't deserve health care. So I have a hard time turning my head away from sick people and just say, let them eat cake. They should have had a job that had insurance. That's easier for some of us to come by than it is for others. So just in general, it's just a tone that doesn't jive with my life philosophy at this particular point in my life. And who knows, maybe age does that to people, but that's just sort of the feeling that I've had. I've felt very, very sad and dismayed over the past year, and I'm sure you all have heard the quote. Steve, could you hand me that paper over there? I knew, just that sheet on top. This kind of expresses I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it expresses, the term snowflakes came up, and people who feel like I do are called snowflakes. And this one goes on, I am not a liberal snowflake. And it highlights a few of the things that this person says they are. It says, the last sentence is what I wanted to highlight. It says, if my belief in equity, empathy, goodness, and love indeed makes me or people like me snowflakes, then you should know winter is coming. And that's kind of how I've felt. I've never been an activist. I've never been marching. Well, after I went to Washington last year, I went to a protest in Lawrenceburg or Nicholasville when Mitch McConnell was speaking. I went to Louisville when Trump was flying in for what could only be called to me a campaign rally, even though he had just been in office 3 months. And I went to a Frankfurt rally, and I've never done anything like that in my life. But it's all anew to do, to feel like I had a voice. So that's where I stand. And I did go to Lexington last month, sort of in the local reincarnation. It wasn't a march; it was just a rally commemorating the 1-year anniversary of the Women's March.
Going into the midterms, what's your opinion of Congress at the moment?
Terrible people whose only goal is to get reelected. If we don't have term limits enacted, I feel very negative about the potential, because that is the driving goal. That's all it seems to me anyone cares about. And when they're finished taking the heat, as we've seen a few, they decide to drop out and not run again. But until we have term limits, the partisanship is shameful. It's embarrassing. I don't see how people sleep at night. And I don't know. I have a very low opinion of our Congress right now. And maybe they're just doing what the system allows them to do, but I'm very disappointed. Do you mean what do I think will happen in the midterms
what would you like to see happen, or what you think will happen? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about it?
Of course, I would like to see the Democratic Party take back one or both branches of the legislature. I'm not savvy. I don't keep up with it enough to know the likelihood of that. I do know this, that after the surprise of the presidential election, I don't really think anybody knows what's going to happen. And I wouldn't presume to think, oh, Democrats are going to take this back, because I never thought it was possible for a man who spoke to Billy Bush on a bus like this, and it was on tape. I thought in years past that would have killed the deal, and we elected a person capable of saying that anyway. So I really honestly wouldn't venture a guess. I wouldn't venture a guess. My hope is that we can take back some seats, but I can't tell you.
Do you see any of that change maybe in Kentucky, or do you think it would be in other states?
Well, we have the Andy Barr seat up, as I understand it, and we have 2 or 3 good candidates. Although, if you get too many, running against each other, I don't know how that would turn out ultimately. So, I think that's a possibility. Inside Kentucky, and I understand Yarmouth in Louisville has an opponent too, but. One seat in Kentucky is not going to make a difference. It's going to have to be more aggregated than that. And I, quite frankly, wouldn't begin to venture a guess to know how disgruntled the whole populace is. You hang around people who feel like you, and you get a notion that something is a certain way, but I don't know how you extrapolate that to the whole population. I mean, my daughter lives in Washington, D.C., and the night of the election, in 2016, she and her boyfriend were at a party with Hillary shirts on, and they were ready to celebrate. And because they had, felt certain that this is the way it was going to go, and that changed. So I think everybody feels very, very uncomfortable making predictions after the gigantic failure to produce a positive prediction last time. So I'm going to pass on that one.
Okay.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, with your active, I don't know if I would say activism, but you're travel, you're traveling to some of these marches, and has that extended into state politics at all, or do you have any opinions on how the governor's doing or how our state legislature is doing?
Well, it's a mess too, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you have. I don't agree, of course, with Governor Bivens. A lot of his policies, they seem harsh. It bothers me that he's a New Englander that established residency in Kentucky and is here. He's very well spoken, very articulate man, and I appreciate that about him. But as far as the substance of what he says, I disagree with. I would think there's not a teacher in the state who's happy with the threat of pension coverage and insurance coverage being tampered with. I have mixed feelings about the making welfare recipients more accountable. I mean, no one likes to think that people are, quote, cheating the system and getting something they shouldn't. But as a really wise, little bit older friend of mine pointed out, she said, do we think the wealthy don't cheat too? And when they cheat, it costs us a lot more. And that's not condoning cheating, but, sometimes I believe the governor would have you think that half our population is out there trying to get food stamps or get something that's not due them, and I don't know that should be the focus of what we're talking about. I differ fanatically on his whole thing about making Kentucky the first state to not have an abortion clinic. I'm unashamedly pro-choice, and if he thinks abortions would stop because Kentucky doesn't have a clinic, he's sadly mistaken. If the country thinks they would stop because they're illegal, they're sadly mistaken. It's like the gun lobby says, if we outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns. Well, if we outlaw abortions, only wealthy people who can travel will have abortions, but they will still have them. Poor, disenfranchised people will continue to have children that they can't take care of or won't take care of, or they will do unsafe things that happened in the past. I mean, outlawing that is not going to change the fact that it's always happened. So I'm adamantly at odds with his position there. And I don't know how solid his position will be in the next election, because he eked in very, very much under the wire, and I don't know how solid he is as an incumbent. And then of course we've had the leadership in the House with the sexual harassment payoffs, and it's just the whole thing, state and national, is so tawdry and undignified. When my son, who's 32, was born, I got him this bib that said "Future President." There's no way I'd buy that bib now for any child. Yeah. It's not something that I think anyone should aspire to, given the nature of the beast. So I'm not a glass half full person right now.
Mrs. Brown, is there anything that you would like to say that you think we haven't touched on, or anything like that?
This is something that'll probably rankle a lot of people. But if you interview anyone else, the question that I have about the continued support for our president, given the numerous controversies and questions and, quite frankly, just boorish behavior over the past year, is the support that he gains from very evangelical and outspoken Christians puzzles me more than any probably thing in my adult life. And I don't discuss this with my friends because, you know, it's going to be a non-productive thing, and I don't want to lose friendships, and I don't want to offend anyone. But I consider myself a Christian. I've gone to church all my life. And the Christian values that I was raised with, that is honesty, humility, kindness, gentleness, sharing, are not at all exhibited by the person who occupies the office now. And therefore, those same qualities are not going to be present, I don't think, in the policies that go forward. And the answer that I hear is that, well, we don't like the man, but we like the policies. Well, unlike Machiavelli, who said, you know, the end justifies the means, I don't agree with that. I don't think that that end justifies parading this person who, quite frankly, if we lived in the same town and ran in somewhat of the same circles, I would cross the street not to run into him. He offends me that badly. And that, I mean, I just have to say that the things that he represents are so antithetical to my core values that I don't want to be around such a person like that. And so the fact that ministers, many of them, many well-known people like Franklin Graham, hold up for this person just befuddles and bothers me a lot. And the question, I would like to have that answered for me in a way that I can understand, and I've not heard it yet, other than to say that the policies justify the action. And what I would say to that is, you know, we always build role models for our children, and is this what we want to show our children? You know, we want our athletes to be good role models. We want our teachers, our policemen, and this is just a puzzle to me. And you know, we can get into other politicians. Well, it's better than Hillary would have been. It's better than Bill Clinton was. Let's deal with what we're talking about now. Let's deal with. No, I don't think. I would take any. I would beg for Mitt Romney to be our president now. I'd be happy. I'm not a partisan person. I didn't vote for John Kerry, which tells you I voted for Bush, because of John Edwards, because I knew he was a charlatan. And I knew his core. And character matters to me. And it seems like we're given a lot of passes on character these days, and that troubles me too. So if someone can help me understand that, that would maybe be beneficial to me. That's one continuing question I have that I haven't heard a good answer for yet.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your opinions with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.